please join me in welcoming the stars of Beautiful, Jessie Mueller, Anika Larsen, and Jarrod Spector. Hello.
Hi.
Before you started working on Beautiful, how much did you know about Carole and Barry and Cynthia and Jerry?
I didn't know. I certainly didn't know a whole lot about Barry and Cynthia. I didn't know that much about Jerry Goffin either, who was Carole King's first husband, her writing partner. And they had, literally hundreds of hits in like the late 50s and early 60s together. But I sort of knew Carole's work through, she worked with James Taylor a lot when in the beginning of the 70s, they were friends and they did a lot of music together, and I sort of knew her stuff through him, but that was sort of my connection with it. I certainly didn't know the extent of like what we go into in the show. Even musically, I didn't know as much about her as I certainly appreciate now.
Yeah, I mean, I had a similar experience, and it's, it just goes to show, unless it's a singer-songwriter, you often don't know who writes the song. So I knew all the songs. I didn't necessarily know that Carole wrote all of them. To me, You've Got a Friend is like a James Taylor song, and Natural Woman is an Aretha Franklin song, and I knew all of the songs that Barry and Cynthia wrote for the most part. I just didn't know that they had written them. I didn't really know who they were. But then you look at the catalog of these, these couples, and it's extraordinary.
Yeah, it's one of the really most fun parts of the show is coming to see. And I always tell people not to read the song list in the program because it's much more fun if you don't know what's the next song, because the reveals of wait a minute, they wrote that and they wrote that. It does make you think about songwriting and appreciate. Somebody is actually writing these hits. If it's not a singer-songwriter, then somebody is writing these hits. And like we wrote You've Lost That Love and Feeling, which is the #1 song played on the radio of all time. So you know Barry and Cynthia, you just don't know Barry and Cynthia.
And the three of you must have done a bunch of research to get to know these characters.
Yeah.
What was one of the things you were most surprised to learn about these people and their careers?
One of my favorite moments of doing research was they worked at a building called 1650 Broadway, which is Broadway and 51st. And there's a picture that I found at one point. It's actually in a couple of the books about 1650, and it's all of the people who wrote songs there, and there were lots of hits that came out of that building. But it's a picture of a sea of men in suits and two female faces. It's Carole and it's Cynthia. And that just really floored me to the degree to which they were extraordinary women. And both of them are so humble about it and say that somehow at the time, even though they were women doing men's work in a men's world, they didn't really think about it. They didn't think of it as their gender as being an obstacle, that they just, that's what they wanted. Carole wanted to write music and Cynthia wanted to write lyrics, and so they did it. And
I don't think they thought of it as groundbreaking either at the time. It just didn't occur to them not to do it.
Yeah.
They knew they were capable, so they just did it. And people let them, so.
I mean, that's just the concept of what Donnie Kirshner put together with taking teenage writers to write songs for teenage artists who were selling, to teenage record buyers. I mean, that concept of what he started doing, and and just as we went through finding out that these little pairs of Jewish kids in offices were writing all of these songs, especially a lot of R&B songs, for all of these prominent black groups, the Shirelles and the Drifters, etc. And you would just never think that's how these songs came about, and then you find out, wow, you know what I mean? This two writers from Brooklyn.
Yeah, and there was this it was an extraordinary time to be born in Brooklyn, apparently, because it was just a whole cluster of people. I mean, it wasn't just these guys; it was a lot of others. I mean, Neil Sedaka, it was
Paul Simon.
Paul Simon, yeah.
It was there were so many of them that came out of that time,
yeah. And I think that generation too was part of that. Came from that generation, had an appreciation of the generation that came before it, which was all the writers of Tin Pan Alley and a lot of the people that were writing Broadway musicals. And I know that the real Barry, Cynthia, Carole, and Jerry, when this all came together and it became a Broadway musical, they were also thrilled because they had all had an investment in that sort of art form before. Like Carole and Jerry, one of the first things they set out to do together was to write a musical and write a play. It never really happened, but they're portrayed in a musical now, so it's kind of cool.
Yeah, that's so cool that you bring up the real people who are all alive. Jerry, Cynthia, and Carole are still with us and still.
Actually, Jerry passed away.
Jerry passed away.
Jerry passed away, but yeah, the three the other 3 writers are still
But that was
alive
only a
and-
few months ago. So.
Yeah, it was only a few, but he was around when you were first putting up.
Yeah, and he came.
the
So
show.
all
Yeah.
of them have seen the show.
Yeah, which is so great. But Carole didn't end up seeing the show until a little bit into the run. You had met her once, I believe, in San Francisco when you were running there.
Yeah, we
or
met
after
her.
You got back.
Well,
We met her
we
here
met
for
her when we
rehearsal.
got back. So we did this show out of town in San Francisco for like a month, right?
Yep.
Ish. Okay. So we rehearsed in New York, then we went to San Francisco and did the show, and we came back. And I remember I saw you. We had a week off, and we were walking down. I don't remember what rehearsal studio it was. But I was walking down the street and I saw Jarrod walking in, and I was like, oh, I can't wait to give him a hug. And I think I did. I walked into the vestibule.
And I was already like slack-jawed.
Yeah, he had already seen it. So she had her back turned to us, but I saw Sherry, one of her daughters, and her manager. She's her manager now. And she's been very involved in the project. She's one of our lead producers, very instrumental in making it all happen. And I just see the back of Carole's head, and I knew it because I saw the hair. And I was like, and I think I just looked at you and
we
I was
were
like, all right, so we guess this is happening today. And then sure enough, we got up in the elevators and Sherry kind of turned to me and she was like, I have someone I'd like you to meet. I was like, okay. Absolutely, I'd like to have that happen, and she was she was so cool. And then, then she didn't see. That was November.
Yep.
And she didn't see the show until April.
So
It was very difficult for her to see.
Yeah, that's what I had heard. And then she came to see it, and she said,
Not because it wasn't good, but because it was.
No, because
okay.
it was good.
Because it was
in
good.
fact.
No, she did
She
say
says,
that.
yeah, no,
she
no,
did
she
say
said,
that. She
yeah.
was like, because she'd hear things from people friends would go see it and stuff, and it was almost like the more positive feedback came back about like, Carole, it's really, really great. It was like the harder it was for her to see it, because if you haven't seen the show, if you do, hopefully you come see it. It portrays a lot of really, well, for all the writers involved, it portrays these very difficult, intimate, life-changing moments in their young lives and their young careers. And yeah, it was just very difficult for her to sort of watch it all happen again. I mean, she lived through it, so.
So what was the night like that she came to see the show? You didn't know she was in the audience. What
No,
was that
none
like?
none of us knew.
No one in the building knew. Nobody
Well, like
was
one
allowed to
stage
know.
manager,
Yeah.
our press people had to know because they were doing, the like Secret Service agent of like, get her in, don't let anyone notice her.
She had a
She was
wig.
wearing-
She had a disguise on.
And Jarrod was doing the speech for Broadway Cares collecting, which the theater community does twice a year, right? And he's starting you got to about
I was,
After-
I
this
was
is
doing my
after we
normal
bowed.
this is
spiel.
after
Yeah,
we
did
bow, right? We have no idea she's there.
And they go out and start the thing. And they had told us that the couple of days before, like, we're going to tape the Broadway Care speech. Tricky
For press.
fools. And of course, I'm a schmuck. Yeah, sure, whatever. That makes sense. No, that makes no sense, but sure, fine. So we're ready for the cameras to be in the crowd. So we were all prepared. So it wasn't alarming. And then I get 10, 15 seconds into the speech, and suddenly there's this gasp from the crowd. And I'm like, what the hell? I look over, and there she is. Just
She's walking out
Just
from
this
stage right with a
radiant
microphone
light
and her
of a
like
human
sparkly
being.
black jacket, and the audience is just going nuts.
And I saw her, and I immediately turned to Jessie because I was like, "How's Jessie doing?" And Jessie immediately face crumples, just immediate tears.
I went into a cold sweat.
So then I sympathy cried. I think we didn't stop crying for about 15 minutes. The audience lost their minds, and
She
then
took
she
the
raised
mic. She took the m-
$30,000 single-handedly for Broadway Cares that night by singing "You've Got a Friend" for the audience.
She took the mic and just took over the stage, and she said, "This is my first time seeing it, and it's effing awesome."
She did say that. You can actually, if you go on YouTube and type in Carole King Surprise, you can see there's like a 4-minute version of it.
That's amazing. And Anika, you have one of my favorite stories about meeting Cynthia as well, and the kind of the relationship that you've developed together in
Yeah.
researching your character and getting to know her. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we've become real buddies. We actually went out. We went on sort of a double date and went out drinking together at one point, and that was super fun. And lots of stories, lots of truths came out that I can't reveal. But she's really loving. It's not really a side of her that you see too much. She's super sassy and funny in the show, but she's got this real loving side. So she's really taken me under her wing, and we've become really good friends. And so we email back and forth all the time. And it's this game has started where she calls "Dear Me" and signs "You," but it's always a different. Like I'll say I'm 8 times a week you, and she'll write back "Vintage You," and it's just become this little game. Yeah, super cute. She's so funny. She's really as funny as she is on stage. So it's always just she makes me laugh a lot.
Yeah, and then Jarrod, you had the wonderful opportunity of performing with Barry when you did a concert at 54 Below in the city. Can you talk a little bit about working with him? and
Yeah,
doing that?
it was so. I mean, yeah, it's amazing. I mean, it was kind of a fun little role change because it's been a while since he performed. Even though he has records out, and I've listened to his some of his CDs, and he still sounds great. He still really sounds great. And but he called me. We worked it out over time. We had a bunch of phone conversations, and he was a little bit nervous. I hope he doesn't hear this and get embarrassed. But he was a little bit nervous, and he hadn't sung in a while, and asked me if can make sure that there's lyrics, so that just in case he forgets. And I said no problem. We're gonna whatever you need will be totally taken care of. And then we had this band rehearsal with all the guys and girls I usually play with, and Barry, and he came in and we sang, and then he was going to sing Somewhere Out There by himself, the piano, and it's just amazing to see 7-8 veteran
Which they
musicians.
wrote, Cynthia and Barry, long after the show ends, but they wrote the song Somewhere Out There from An American Tail, the movie.
Yeah, so there's
nominated for an Oscar.
7 or 8 of us are just in this rehearsal room watching him, and just weeping alone, and then we got to do it on stage again. He came up and sang several songs, and he sang Somewhere Out There in front of everybody. And I've actually seen pictures of myself, kind of like a little boy on a stool, just watching him.
Anika and I were there. We saw it happen, and we were sitting with Cynthia. At least the one night.
Yeah, that was the one night. Yeah,
that was the one night. Yeah, it was really cool. And to watch Cynthia watch Barry, it was just very cool.
Cool. I didn't get to see it, but I heard that it was amazing, and it sounded like such a fun night.
Yeah, it was really amazing.
Such a great opportunity. Another great part of the show is, Carole King's a wonderful piano player, and she plays piano and for all the songs. And Jessie, on stage, you had to kind of learn that ability, and also, but it's not actually you playing the songs in the show. So talk to us about that bit of theater magic and how you train to do it. And
yeah. I mean, I'm playing. Everybody that plays instruments in the show is playing them. I mean, the pianos are all functional. There's no sounding boards in them. The keys are all functional. Jarrod plays the piano in the show. Jarrod plays the guitar in the show. And several other people play guitars and drums and things like that. So we all had lessons to make sure that we were syncing up with what was happening in the pit, because the sound was being sourced from what's happening in the pit. So, and when we were all really game for that, I know I'm just to speak for myself, but to me, it was a huge part of making it as realistic as possible. I mean, I had to sort of take it on as another acting challenge, because I'm not as good of a piano player as she is, obviously. But yeah, I went back into lessons, and so we'd go to rehearsal for 8 hours a day, and then I'd have a piano lesson after that, and then it's just sort of, it's changed too as the show has changed, because our musical director, Jason Howland, is a brilliant piano player, and he's also really a very soulful and instinctive player. So he'll play things differently sometimes.
He also gets bored, let's be honest.
Say what?
He gets bored.
Well, he gets bored because he's like a genius. So he's like down in a pit, you know what I mean? Like sitting the entire show playing for 2.5 hours. So he gets bored. So he does things and he changes things up, and I have to listen to what he's doing. And so it's a combination of listening, watching. We have monitors sort of around the perimeter of where the mezzanine is in the theater, so we can see him for cues and things like that. So
and he's also right.
And he's right there.
The
so
feet,
sometimes I can see him, sometimes watching on the monitor,
cues.
But always listening acutely for little different licks or something is different, a different bass line, a different. He messes with you a lot too.
Yeah, he messes with me a lot, especially when I'm singing, when I'm playing for Cynthia, especially because I'm not singing lead on it, so then I can actually pay attention to, and I'm looking right over the piano, and he's right there, so I can always catch him. Jason is, I think this is one of the things that makes the show so special. The better that illusion is, the more believable the show becomes. And Jason has done such an amazing job at capturing the authentic personality of each piano player. And it's amazing to watch Jessie mimic the creation of the sound that Jason is actually playing, so that it really does look like she's doing it, because she plays with Carole's attitude and
right, he does, and then
her,
I'm doing what I've seen him do.
Yeah, and so her physicality, and I try to do the same thing, because they're exciting piano players. They play with gusto, and so you can't just tickle them. You really have to dig in, and so you have to play confidently, even if you're not really playing it.
Do you feel it in your shoulders too?
Yeah, all the time. I don't play as many songs, but it's wonderful to watch. Sometimes we forget that she's not playing because she's so in it, and that synergy.
And and that changes the way that you sing vocally, sitting at the piano.
Well, I was just gonna say, one of the things that's so fun about the show, there's some freedom, because it's pop music. It's not like we're doing, I don't know, like Rodgers and Hammerstein, where you really you do, or your Sondheim, your exact rhythms, and you're like, because of Jason, the music director, we have a little bit of freedom, and he does things a little differently. If he plays something different, I sing it a little differently, or sometimes when I sing something a little different, he'll play something different. He'll reframe a chord and it's really cool, and it's one of the things that keeps it really really fresh and really kind of different from night to night and very much alive, I think, both for the performers and for the audiences.
Yeah, it makes it rock and roll.
Yeah,
It feels like you're singing with a band, because you really are singing with a band. You're singing with an improvisational group of musicians who are staying true to, a certain framework so that the show continues to go, and, tempos are generally set. But we have, from the top down, we have this amazing group of musicians who are varying slightly all the time so that we all can stay alive within the music, which really makes it exciting.
Yeah, I'm going to ask one final question, then we'll open it up for audience questions. You mentioned that it is pop music, and that you mentioned earlier with the idea of young songwriters writing for young artists. How do you think that these writers and singers have influenced today's artists?
We all just went like, well, where do we begin? No, I mean, kind of, where do you begin? I mean, if we hadn't had the Carole Kings and the Carly Simons and the Joni Mitchells of the world, we wouldn't have the Sarah Bareilles and the Katy Perrys and the
Alicia Keys.
And the Alicia Keys and the, you know what I mean? We wouldn't have so many people, not just for what they did musically, but also what they did for women in music and sort of setting a bar that way. But, I mean, these writers, like we said before, these writers were immensely influential. And it was also because they were also really smart musicians, and they were well-trained musicians. I mean, they didn't know just pop music. Their pop music was so good because they understood classical music, and they understood jazz, and they understood blues, and they understood, you know what I mean, all these kind of root music, which they all used in the creations of their songs, and they used it in the chording and the form, the way they would shape their songs, which, you know what I mean, songwriters are still using today. People are always messing with it and breaking it and coming away from it and coming back to it. But it's like, they're hugely influential. I mean, I think, you know what I mean? Even in like 10, 20 years, like these kind of writers are going to be, they are as influential as like, they're going to be like the new standards. You know what I mean? As we see standards today of like the Irving Berlins or, the Cole Porters of the world. Like,
yeah, there's no reason.
This is kind of what these people are or will be now.
Yeah, the idea of a rock and pop American, that rock and pop music will be part of the sort of Great American Songbook.
Yep.
These are the writers of the songs that will be that should be included in that.
And it's so American, like it's very uniquely American.
Music. And they come from a time when it was more common that everyone played the piano, that more people played the piano, that every house had a piano. I mean, in Tin Pan Alley times, there weren't so many records available to everyone all the time, so people ran out and got sheet music and took it home and played their favorite song. And it wasn't until records and radio became more and more prominent that people played piano a little less, because they didn't have to play it in order to hear their favorite songs. But when you had to play it, everyone had to play it. I mean, that's the culture that they came from, so they were so well trained and so well versed in all different, you ask Barry, and I've asked each of them, like, who's the better, and they each say the other's a better musician. Oh no, he's a better musician, and no, she's the better piano player, and they're all so complimentary and lovely, and it's it's so cool to, if you go back and listen to each of them, one influence the other, just the way the Beach Boys and the Beatles did the same thing, and and Carole and Paul Simon and Elton John at a later time, all influencing each other, and that continues to today. And now you have people like Sarah Bareilles and Bruno Mars, and the newest generation of songwriters like that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, let's take some questions from the audience.
Hello.
Hi.
I saw the show in November, and there were so many people in the audience who knew every song. You literally heard the light bulbs go off in their head when you sing the Tonight You're Mine completely, or some kind of Wonderful starts, and you hear that these people know the songs. Was it taxing to play a woman who's so iconic that everybody knows her music? Was it nerve-wracking to be that person, knowing that you're portraying what people are already so fond of?
Oh yeah, absolutely. To me, that was like the huge underlying fear was like, well, I could either succeed at this or I could fail miserably. And I don't know, I guess that was part of what was intriguing and the challenge of it. I felt connected to her music, and that was the thing I kept coming back to. And I just felt like if I just keep coming back to that, because the more and more I learned about her, I think that's what she kept coming back to. But yes, absolutely. You deal with the expectation of, you deal with people's expectations. You know what I mean? And it's not even that, it's not even just that they know the music, it's that people have, like you said, a very deep connection to the music, because for a certain generation, you know what I mean, it was literally the soundtrack of their lives, and these very important moments in their lives and forming who they became, and the music is like, it's a synergy of that. So yeah, I mean, I thought about it a lot in the beginning, and then I had to kind of forget about it, and then it always creeps up, and then I try to push it away. But you know what I mean? The other thing that, and I'm not just saying this, but like, the other thing that happened, the shift that happened, was it was the idea of how we're going to do this, how am I going to do this, how am I going to do this. Then you get in a rehearsal room and you start the work, and you realize there's so much work to be done, and you get in the room with the people that you're doing it with, and you're like, oh, well, this is going to be my Carole, because this is my Barry, and this is my Cynthia, and this is my Donnie Kirshner, and this is my Jerry Goff, and then you form it from there, because you do remember that you're telling a story, so there's some artistic license that's taken there. But yeah, I mean, it's something I think about all the time, and I think it like, we all know we have a very high bar, and then that's what keeps us motivated every night to tell the stories, you know, as truthfully as we can and with as much integrity that we can.
All right. You brought it up earlier that music was produced or written at 1650 Broadway. Why is it that Alden Music being at 1650 and so many other publishers in at 1650, did the music become known as the Brill Building sound, which was at 1619, had nothing to do with...
Right, different building. This happens a lot. They were sort of happening at the same time. There's this sort of swift line that happens in the show very quickly. Donnie Kirshner has a line about, like, it's when Carole first comes to pitch her song, and he says something about, like, this isn't the Brill Building with their fancy big time writers. There was a shift from what was happening in the Brill Building was these very what's the word I want? Established. Thank you. Very established writers. And then the thing with 1650 was with Don Kirshner and Al. What was his name? I'm like an Al. I'm blanking on his name, but that's where Al Dunn Music came from. Don Kirshner and Al, and I'm terrible. I'm blanking on his name right now.
Nevins.
Thank you. Nevins, was that it? Thank you. They just had this sort of wild idea, which was like, well, rock and roll is like teenage music. That's where this is coming from. That's who's buying this music. What if we got teenagers? And that was the thing. They went out and they found the Barry and Cynthias and the Carols and the Jerrys and the Neil Sadakas and the Paul Simons of the world. And
Yeah, Carole was 18 when Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow was number one. Or was it number one? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was their first number one hit.
I mean,
But yeah, there's often confusion about that.
you got 1650 and 1619, which is the Brill Building right across the street from each other, more or less, and, you know, these different groups of writers writing at the same time. I mean, I was in Jersey Boys for a long time, and Bob Crew and Gaudio and Frankie Valli and all those guys were in the Brill Building. And I really think maybe it just comes down to, like, the Brill Building is easier to say than
sounds better.
1650. It's like, oh yeah, that's the Brill Building
The
stuff.
Brill
It's
Building
like,
sound.
And they
So
all
the
were
1650
influencing
sound
each other.
sounds
all
pretty good.
influencing
And
each other
they'd
and
see each
all
other
back
on the
and forth.
sidewalk. I mean, it was all the same neighborhood. They'd go down to the newsstand and get the billboards at the same time. So, I mean, it was all part of the same world. So if you're looking at the world from the outside, it's easy to sort of put
Lump
it all
it
under
in.
one umbrella.
1650 needs a name, and then I feel like
Yeah.
it would have had the same.
Yeah.
a one-syllable name.
Yeah, a really
Yeah.
easy, catchy one. We'll think of it, and then, yeah.
Hi, Ms. Larsen. I've heard a lot of your stories about some of the medical things you went through when the show in San Francisco, and I just admire your work ethic so
Thank you.
much. And I was wondering if you could talk about what was able to power you through that.
Yeah, he's referring to our literally day 4 of rehearsals. We had all just met, and I started getting stomach pains. And I thought it was gas, so I didn't say anything because I'd only known them 4 days. Now I would talk about it with them, but 4 days in, I didn't. Turned out I needed emergency colon surgery. They had to remove 8 inches of my colon. So they tell me that at 4 a.m. in the ER, and I said, well, how long is it going to take to recover? Because I'm doing this new Broadway show, and I knew how extraordinary it was going to be on some level. You don't really know, but I believed. And they said it would take up to 8 weeks to recover, and I didn't have 8 weeks. And I didn't really know what I was going to do. But then I woke up from the surgery, and my Trinidadian night nurse said to me, tomorrow morning, you got to get up, you got to walk, you got to move, because the only way they're going to let you out of here is if you poop. And they're not going to feed you till you pass gas, so you got to walk, you got to get it moving on the inside. So I thought if there's something I can do to control my fate, and I beat a groove in the waiting room outside my hospital room. And 6 days after my surgery, I was back, staples up my belly, I was with a binder around my waist, holding it together. I was back, I'd lost 10 pounds in 10 days, and I was back in rehearsal with these guys trying to act macho like I was fine. I wasn't really fine. They could clearly tell because he always had a chair waiting for me the minute we were done with scenes. And I couldn't really sing or talk very well, but the producers had known me. I'd done the workshops of the show, so they knew what I was capable of, and they hung in there with me. And so honestly, I thank you for, but I don't feel like there was really an option. I mean, it was, you don't give up on this. It's this extraordinary role in an extraordinary show. You fight for it. And then it was the group, the community, taking care of me and making it possible for me. The producers got me a car service to take me to and from rehearsals every day because there's just no way I would have been able to navigate the subway. So everyone helped to make it. They would call me for shorter days for a while and sort of let me take it easy. And so that's what made it possible for me to get through. Was really get by with a little help from my friends.
Yeah, she was such a trooper. I mean, you wouldn't know. I mean, we kind of knew. I mean, we knew because we knew the severity of what she had gone through, but she was so strong. I mean, on the outside, you wouldn't. I mean, most of the cast, I feel like, had no idea quite how bad it was. You
We
could
were
just
trying
see
to be
it
sweet.
flickers in her eyes every now and again.
And you'd be like, "Don't make me laugh,
definitely
'cause
need
it
to
hurts."
Yeah, and she,
Oh God, it hurts a lot.
Yeah.
And I just kept thinking I was going to faint, but I couldn't let anybody know. So.
Having worked with such major songwriters material, how does that, are you guys songwriters? And if so, how does that influence you in terms of the songwriting you're doing or where your songwriting is going? And also, since you're looking at this history of R&B, or a history of rock and R&B, did you go, I assume you went back in and watched a lot of videos of TV shows and such. Talk a little bit about that experience of reviewing it. Now, hopefully you're rock historians. So.
Well, there's always more to learn, but no, it does when you play somebody, when you try to get into the mind frame of somebody like that, someone that has, to me, songwriting is one of the greatest talents. Like, I wish I had it, because to me, I've been thinking about it a lot since we've started the show. It is literally being able, oftentimes, to create something beautiful out of something painful. Often, I mean, whether it's a love song or whatever, but to be able to take human experiences and like actually do something with them, not just go through them yourself, but create something beautiful out of it, so that someone else can get through their version of that experience or whatever. I wish I was. I've dabbled in a little songwriting. I'm not sure I have the gift, but doing something like this, I think I really do have more of an appreciation for it and what that talent is, because it's especially when you look at music like this that has stood the test of time the way it has. Because it's that good. It's that good.
Yeah, so many of the songs are so. I mean, I feel like it's simultaneously frustrating, makes you feel terrible about yourself, and also encouraging because they're so simple. I mean, musically speaking, so many of the songs in the show are variations on Heart and Soul. I mean, they're all 1-6-4-5, 1-6-4-5. You can play that chord progression and sing like 15 of the songs in our show, and yet they make them sound so different. And then there are slight variations, and it's like that's where the genius comes in. And it's something you're like, well, if they could do it that simply, it can be done. And yet, what makes them so extraordinary is that they were able to do it and keep refining this thing down and distilling it until they just had this beautiful melody with an amazing set of lyrics, whether written by Cynthia or Jerry or Carole. I mean, I wish I could do what they did, but try as I might.
I agree. I think it's the genius is in the simplicity, as I think a lot of young writers come in and they just work too hard and they gild the lily. And there's always, every night, because I play a lyricist and I'm more verbal than I am musical. They often hear stuff backstage that completely goes over my head. But there's a lyric every night that I feel like sort of encompasses the Jerry Goffin, who was her lyricist, Carole's lyricist, his genius, which is from "Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow?" I'd like to know that your love is a love I can be sure of, and it lines up perfectly so that your love and sure of rhyme. And you don't think about. I mean, we all know that song. I'd heard that song for years, and I hadn't thought. I mean, the simplest words, relaying the simplest idea, and yet that what a genius set of words. Like that the rhyme is perfect. I just think that it's just such a model for people who are working too hard to find rhymes for bigger things. It's just so elegantly, deftly done, and that's what these two teams were just so good at.
Yeah.
Oh, classic performances of old. Yeah, I mean, you can certainly talk about this. I certainly went back and like watched the Animals sing live because I have to sing an Animals tune, and I've definitely watched old Drifters Drifters performances, and I have a certain fascination with music history, especially like rock and pop history. So I've watched a lot of old performances of those tunes. But I mean, did you watch a lot of?
I mean, there was a point too when Carole wrote a memoir like 5 years ago or something like that. So there was a point when I was going through that book, and she really goes into detail about the people she was listening to and the people that, she listened to these radio shows, and then she'd go to the live shows. And so I was like frantically like underlining everything, be like, I gotta look this person up. And I did, you know what I mean? I wish I could recall all those names now, but like we said before, these writers had such an appreciation of what came before them. Which I think is just the sign of any good musician. Any good musician appreciates another good musician and will give the credence to what was done before, and whoever is doing it well now. Like it's just I love musicians. It's a very shared. I don't see it as a competitive sort of field. I mean, it is in many ways, like it has to be, but it's very collaborative. It's a very collaborative art form.
Cool. Well, I think that's a great note to end on. So please join me in thanking Jessie, Anika,